I've heard this word thrown around for, my entire adult life. Don't really know exactly what it is until I started researching it a little bit.
What is the good life? I want to live the good life, so what is it?
It's very powerful when you realize you're doing what you're called to do.
It's all about having this personal freedom and being able to live with a peaceful, tranquil mind.
The preferences. Are there any limitations to personal preferences within Stoicism?
The only good. Wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, that's all you need to live a good life.
Well, welcome. We're back for another episode. Appreciate you guys joining us, and make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you are, whether you're on the audio or video side. We're on all the different platforms. We're on X, I still call it Twitter. We're on Rumble, and we're on YouTube and Apple, Spotify, wherever you guys get your podcasts. So thanks for being here. This is the Mike C podcast, and today our guest is the host of the Street Stoics podcast, where he shares the ancient knowledge of the Stoics, which aims to show the benefits of this wisdom and how to put it into practice. He lives by Stoicism as his philosophy and his way of life. The Stoics teach their followers to focus on the moment, and that's how Stoicism should be approached. Stoicism is a philosophy that they adhere to in their daily lives, and the goal is to live better lives, and it is their duty as Stoics to share this wisdom with others. They also believe that virtue is the only good. He also provides Stoic coaching to both groups and individuals, which offers guidance to a more peaceful life. Please welcome to the podcast, Benny Voncken. Benny, thanks for being here and hanging out with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and that's an excellent introduction. And thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure, and looking forward to a good conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. So let's start with the basics. I've heard this word thrown around for, my entire adult life. Don't really know exactly what it is until I started researching it a little bit after we connected for this podcast. So explain the basics of Stoicism.
Yeah, and that's, Stoic, being labeled as Stoic or Stoicism is kind of a different connotation right now than what it was back in the day. Right now it means like having this stiff upper lip or unemotional, like this Spock character from Star Trek.
Yeah,
But
that's still what comes to mind.
yeah, exactly. And that's kind of like, and I hear it, being used like in the news or on like radio or whatever. And it's just like, it just kind of, as a Stoic, it shouldn't hurt me, but it does, I just want to kind of correct the people. It's like, no, that's not what it's about. And it's like, for me, the best comparison I could make, it's like a Western version of Buddhism and Taoism. That's if you want to compare it to other philosophies that have maybe a more positive connotation, then that would be what you're looking at. But it's all about it's derived from the Socratic philosophy, right? The Stoics originated from Zeno back in like 300 BCE. They were all big fans of Socrates, right? That was kind of their example. This is like, oh, we want to be like him, the sage character, the wise person, and he was all about finding out the truth. Right, knowing yourself, like that's what he kind of said, and he took that the maxim from the Oracle of Delphi, know thyself. That is really the key foundation of, I think, supposedly every philosophy, if you really want to have a philosophy of life. So that's what the Stoics look into as well. And then how do we do that, right? We examine ourselves, we ask ourselves the questions, we really do that deep introspection, which is needed. And then they ask, the follow-up question is that, okay, so we know ourselves, but what is the good life? I want to live the good life. So what is it? Is that filled with, materialistic things, having a lot of money, being healthy and all that stuff? And Zeno kind of, who created Stoicism, he went, he met this Diogenes of Crete, was a cynic. And he's like, I want to learn philosophy, right? This is something that yeah, and I was, I will just start with Zeno, where I kind of started off. So Zeno was he followed Diogenes of Crete when he was shipwrecked and he lost everything, and he came to this library and he saw some philosophical books, and he's like, this is what I want to live like, right? There's other stories, this is kind of like one of them. And then the owner of the bookstore is like, oh, you want to follow philosophers there? Follow that person. That was Diogenes of Crete, one of the cynics. And the cynics, they held purely like virtue is the only good. Wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, that's all you need to live a good life. So he followed him, he started studying with them, then he started studying with others, like the descendants from Plato and all that stuff. And he started making his own philosophy. He said, yeah, virtue is the only good, but I do have preferences, right? And this is kind of where it separates itself from the cynics, especially. Whereas like, I prefer to have a healthy life than, to be ill, or I prefer to have wealth than to be poor. So you have certain preferences in life, and that's kind of makes it a little bit more easier to practice, I guess, and more, close to being human and making it more realistic. So that's something that is the change of like where Stoicism really took off, and it's called Zenoism first, but then Zeno took it, like Socrates was teaching his philosophy in the market square in Athens to the people, right? Because it's a philosophy of life for the people. And Zeno started doing the same, but in a stoa poikile, which is like a covered arch in Athens, and that's where the name comes from the stoa. People of the students from Zeno were called Stoics, so that's kind of where the name comes from. But that's all what it is, right? It's a practical philosophy that should be lived and should be used by the people, and it can be lived by anyone, right? It's very simple, to live virtuous and to live in accordance with your nature. So in order to do that, we really need to know who we are again.
Right. Okay. So you said that what made it stand out was the preferences. Are there any limitations to personal preferences within Stoicism?
It's all dependent on whether it's morally upright.
Okay.
That is the foundational key. So if you make a lot of money in the right way, hey, great, and if you say, and we get this asked a lot, like I host weekly spaces on X, on Twitter. I still struggle with that as well, the same as you do. And people come up and they ask like, but if I want to have this car, I want to have this fancy thing. It's like, yeah, that's great, if you want to have that, but as long as it doesn't own you, right? It's all about having this personal freedom and being able to live with a peaceful, tranquil mind. So if you want to own this fancy car, but if you don't lie awake at night thinking, oh, someone's going to scratch it or steal it, or, something's going to happen with it, then, if that doesn't happen, then great. Yeah. But as soon as those things happen, then the Stoics say, then maybe it's time to get rid of it. Or if, you have to prepare yourself that it might be gone. So it's all about this mental freedom. And, the dichotomy of control is one of the basic things where you can't control the externals. But you can control, and the only thing you can control is your thoughts, your opinions, your actions, everything that is you. Even your body you can't control. You can live as healthy as you want, or do exercises, go to the gym every day, but you can still get injured. You can still be ill. So that's even an external. So that's kind of the focus where the Stoics say, yeah, we have these preferred indifferences, but they shouldn't lead away from that overarching good of living the good life.
Okay. So there's obviously a moral code. Does it draw its moral code from those ancient philosophies like Plato and those different areas?
Yeah, and that's where the virtues come from, right? So in everything we need to do, we need to make sure that we apply wisdom, justice, temperance, and courage. And that is all, like, again, we have, and it goes a little bit deeper, but it is derived from that. So the Stoics say that we differ from the animals because we have reason and logic, right? We can look at the world from a more rational mind, and we can, if we apply it, which is obviously the difficult part, to be objective of like what things happen. But we have our wants and desires, that come from this animalistic urge that we have. We have the impulses, we have fear, the emotions, all of these things that we have to work with, apart from that reason and logic. But if we learn to apply this philosophy, we are able to give ourselves this little pause, right? So, for example, if something triggers you, an external event, right? Because it's always an external event, it triggers you. You have this impulsive action, maybe anger, sadness, or maybe even happiness. And then the Stoics say, okay, but now it's time to take a little pause and to reflect on what it really is. What is this external really? What does it mean to you? And that's the difference where we can then apply a reason and logic and look at the virtuous action, making sure that we make the right action for ourselves, which then obviously is also, inherently the best action for people around us.
So one of the principles of Stoicism stresses the importance of living in accordance with nature. Can you expand on that for us a little bit?
Yeah, and that's a question that kind of is linked with purpose and meaning and why am I here, right? What am I doing? And we get that a lot. And one of the easiest answers, which is obviously difficult to apply or to practice, but it's just to be the best version of yourself. And this is where Stoicism, again, on another note, gets a little bit of a negative reputation, because it feels like we are living only just on ourselves, right? We are just focusing on ourselves, so it's kind of selfish and it's egotistical. But the Stoics say that if you want to be the best version of yourself, you've got to work on yourself. You are the only person who can do that. And by doing so, again, we are, the Stoics are very big on social matters. They also say, like in one of the books, Seneca says, like, if someone asks you where you're from, don't say you're from Athens or from Corinthian, say you're from the world. You're a cosmopolitan, right? We do belong to society. But what better benefit to the society if we are the best version of ourselves? So that's kind of where living under nature comes into mind, because we have to make sure that we do the things that we're supposed to do. And you mentioned the word duty, at the beginning. So we have the example of Marcus Aurelius, his Meditations. If any of your listeners haven't read it, pick that book up. It's been read by so many people. Who was groomed to become the emperor of the Roman Empire, and he wrote a great book, the Meditations. If any of your listeners haven't read it yet, then definitely pick it up. It's his personal notes, his most inner thoughts, never meant to be published. So we're very lucky to have it. But he writes very specifically that he has a sense of duty, right? What I think from the book, and having many conversations with other authors about this, we can sense that he would have preferred to be a philosopher, to just talk about life, to think about life. But this is the role that he has, and he has to make sure that he's the best emperor for the Roman, for his, the public, for the people. And even at one point where the Roman Empire, because he didn't have an easy time during that, his reign. He had a plague, he had many wars, and at one point, to fund those wars, he even just opened the palace and just held like an auction or a garage sale, if you will, selling all of these things to fund the war, which normal emperors wouldn't do. So that sense of duty is very important. And if we then think about that natural state, he was taking that to the next level, right? He had all the temptations in the world to be a Nero or a Caligula, one of those infamous emperors, but he chose to be the right person. And that was his nature, right? He felt like, this is the way I'm supposed to be living. So if you want to kind of have a compass, the compass that I kind of use for living in accordance with my nature is just feeling how decisions feel, right? Or my life feels. Like 2 years ago, I was working in Dubai before as a teacher, then I was writing assessments. And to be honest, work-wise, that last year and a half, the job was super easy, right? But going into the office and doing something that really wasn't me just didn't feel right. So I knew that somewhere inside of me, just like it didn't give me that peace of mind that I wanted. So I quit my job, and then I started, reading more about the Stoics, really delving into it, starting a blog, on X, having weekly conversations, and now even, having a coaching company via Stoica, which is great. Working with 2 guys I met online. I actually went to Panama to visit one of them the other day. So if you follow your nature and you follow the things that you really care about, it's going to be scary, because I'm not really, the income level is, if you're an entrepreneur, starting entrepreneur, it's not, the income is something you worry about, but it feels right. And I think that that's the sense of, like, if you want to live your nature, just listen to yourself, go with your feeling, your instincts and your gut. And that is one of the key compasses for me that helps me kind of like, okay, is this the right decision? Help me use that filter. And then just, at one point you just got to see what happens, right?
Yeah, and that's an important point you make, because it's very powerful when you realize you're doing what you're called to do. Because we've all been in stages and seasons in our lives where we're doing something that might feel monotonous, or we're in a job or a situation, we're part of an organization that we don't feel we're called to be there, and that can cause a lot of inner turmoil, because you're just not happy. Having that job you don't want to have is probably the best example, and so many people deal with that. So just to have that self-realization is important. And then on top of that, there's a certain level of courage that one needs to have to be able to step out of that. As you said, there's a possible income dip if you leave a job that's comfortable in order to pursue your calling. So that's very important, and I just found that interesting that you made that distinction.
Yeah, and you talk about courage, and I get that question a lot. It's like, oh, you left your job. I sold everything when I left Dubai, and it's that's pretty much the we talk about capitalism in the U.S., but then Dubai is just the next level, right? It's just crazy, and it's so easy to get into that flow. But when I left there and I sold everything, I've never felt so free before. It was just yeah, just great, and I
Was
had
it
it
your
in
whole
mind of.
life? Like, did you have a home and a car and like everything? Was your whole life settled in Dubai?
Yeah, I'm from the Netherlands, from this tiny village, and I've left the Netherlands in 2010 when the crisis
Okay.
hit, and I studied tourism, and there were no jobs. Someone said, "Hey, why don't you go to Spain and teach English?" So yeah, sounds good. So moved to Spain, spent 7 years there, and then I went to Dubai. And about that time I was married, but the kind of marriage was kind of making its way downhill. So at the moment I'm divorced. And that's also where Stoicism and these philosophies really give you a good guide to get through those difficult times. But when I left Dubai, yeah, I was renting a house. I was renting my car, which was also kind of with that idea in mind, just to drive to the airport, give the keys, and just leave. And I
Yeah.
had my own apartment, but I lived there for 5 years, so I had like everything, right? My life was there. And then I sold everything. And one great example of, and also, Stoicism is kind of linked with this minimalistic lifestyle where you have
Yeah.
to ask that question is like, do I really need this? Is this important? A little bit like the example with the car. And I really started heavily on the reading side, in Dubai. So I had a really nice, extensive kind of bookshelf where then was growing. And it was kind of, you sense that sense of pride. It's like, oh, this is great. And as I was packing my bags, I was like, but how do I feel? How attached am I to these books, right? Is this like, how much is my urge, my wants and desires to bring these with me? So I put them in a crate, I set them aside. It's like, okay, I'm ready to give them just away, for free to someone who needs them. They're great books. And then, I started packing. I realized I needed an extra suitcase anyway. So I was able to bring them with me. But mentally, I already made that disconnection. And I felt like, okay, this is a good step. Because my preferred outcome would be to bring them with me. And now they're at my parents' place in the Netherlands, in a nice bookshelf there. But I would have been able to leave them behind, right? Because everything that I needed from them is with me. Although I do have like 4 books on my travels, like I have everything fits in a backpack, but I have like 4 Stoic books, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca. I bring them with me for my research and for my writing that I do. But
Yeah.
and also just because I like those books and they're personal to me, but I am willing to leave everything behind. So yeah, I did
Yeah.
leave, and I left everything, and now everything that I own is on my backpack and in a smaller backpack, and that's it. And then I just kind of see where the wind takes me for the next foreseeable future. I don't know.
Could you live that way for the rest of your life?
Um, yeah, that's something that I've been asking myself many times. The way I look at it now, like I'm currently in Ecuador. I'm house and pet sitting, so I kind of move from different people's homes and look after their pets, which is great. It's also nice to have a little refreshing moment. You go to a new place, you settle in, you do
Yeah.
your groceries. But
Sounds fun.
it is, and
Yeah.
I've had the privilege to meet so many great people, lovely pets, amazing surroundings. Like the view I have right now is like the mountainsides in Ecuador, just outside of Cuenca. But I've been in Mexico and Costa Rica and Panama, and all of that stuff. So I have this travel sense in me. That's something that I have, and one of the great things, and even from Stoicism, asked me that question is like, why am I traveling? And Seneca
Yeah.
asked this, he writes these letters to Lucilius, which is a person in Sicily, and he keeps this correspondence. And at one point, he asks him, like, you wonder your travels do you no good, while you're saddled with the very thing you're trying to run away from. And as I read that quote, I was like, what am I doing? Am I running away? Or is this something that is beneficial? And then I started asking myself those questions. And there are parts of me where there's some kind of escapism, some running away, or some kind of, I don't want to stay too long in one place because then what if people get to know me, who I really am, and then they start to be disappointed. But I worked through that, and now it's just like, it's so beneficial to my life. And I like speaking Spanish, which I picked up in Spain, and I wanted to learn different accents and hear them and all that stuff. So now I'm
Yeah.
looking more at how does this enrich my life and how does this help me? So when you ask that question, do I see myself doing this for the rest of my life? Maybe, but you never know. Maybe I'll settle in somewhere again or find a place to stay. But at this moment, I don't see myself like living somewhere for the rest of my life. That's still a hurdle I have to get over, that kind of being somewhere, that commitments kind of style. But I want to have that freedom of location and of time. That's very important to me.
Yeah, there's certainly an appeal to the lifestyle you're describing. Do you feel, it sounds like you've done a lot of self-reflection on your decision to move around right now and explore different places. Do you feel like you're chasing something?
Not anymore. I don't think so. Well, maybe I'm searching for something. Maybe that's the best way to look at
Okay.
it. But I think that that's also the journey of life. Like I remember
Yeah.
driving home from work in Dubai at one point, and this was when I was still teaching, and I was like, okay, what do I really want? What do I really value in life? And I said my time and my and the location, because this was during the COVID crisis. Everything was locked down. I had an uncle who passed away during that time, and I couldn't go and visit him. My parents are getting older, and it was more restrictive to go there if something were to happen. So for me, it was more like I want to be able to, if I have to go back home, I want to be able to go there and spend some time. And last year, I spent 7 months with my parents, because they had like a 50th wedding anniversary. I wanted to be there, and it was also great to just spend some time with them, to be grateful for that moment, to have breakfast with them every morning, because a lot of people don't have that, especially my age, and my parents are getting
Yeah.
older. So it's just a great experience to have. So maybe instead of chasing something or searching, I think it's what it really taught me is to be grateful. And again, you mentioned at the beginning, like Stoicism teaches you to live in the moment. And that's something that it really did for me, is to be grateful when I'm in a moment, to really be there. Because a lot of people, and I saw you did a great episode on the aging of Gen Z, where we just kind of get all this stuck into this the electronic devices, but we
Yeah,
miss everything that we have right now in a moment. And that's something
absolutely.
that Stoicism really taught me. And for example, as I was having breakfast with my parents, I had many moments where I just sat there. This is great. This is such a honor and such a privilege to be able to have breakfast with my parents, have great conversations, get to know them from instead of just from my childhood, also as an adult, get to know them as adults and as people. And that was such a great experience.
Yeah, and you're so right. Living in the moment is so important, and I think it's, as busy humans, we struggle to do that daily in these technology heavy lives that we all live in. We're all staring at phones and screens and answering texts and social media, and the list of things to do on a phone or a laptop is endless. And I myself am a Christian and have been for many years, and it's interesting that I'm seeing some parallels in the things that you're describing in the book. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Bible. In the book of Ecclesiastes, King Solomon stresses living in the moment, living in contentment. I think that's the key to mental health for humans. And I think the lack of that is one of our biggest problems as a species. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I was raised a Christian as well, and kind of made my way to philosophy. And the links between Stoicism and Christianity are really big. For example, Seneca's older brother is actually mentioned in the New Testament, and he was supposedly have met Saint Paul, in one kind of a area, and where he actually released him from prison. So there,
Okay.
and even like the philosophy, the books, the writings of Seneca, you can see them echoing through like Christianity, like
Hmm.
Paul Aquinas used some of the texts, and then Saint Augustine as well. So there are
Hmm.
some links there, but it is like living in the moment as such a profound change in mindset, and that's
Yeah.
something like, and apart from just the electronical devices, it's about we have so many influences that are being brought into our minds. Like this is the best way to live, and even if when we grow up, right, we have this kind of trajectory already preset. You have to go study, you have to go, get a good job, get a house, get this, get that. But then life happens, and I always like that part from the John Lennon quote. Life is what happens while you're busy making other plans,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what it is,
It
right? So
is.
we
Yeah.
have these obstacles, and we have these adversities, which was another great episode you did. With the finding path through adversity,
Yeah.
which was another one
Thank you.
to listen to if anyone is here. But I think
Appreciate that.
that's even what Marcus Aurelius says. The obstacle is the way. But how can we do that? How can we, even in those difficult moments, find that kind of peace of mind and that calm? Because that's, again, what Stoicism is about. And gratitude is such a powerful tool to use, to just look at yourself and, okay, I look around me and see everything that I need to live in the moment is right here, right now.
Yeah.
All the things that I'm chasing, I don't know if I'm going to get that. My past is gone. Right here is what I have. And yeah, focusing more on that can really help us deal with a lot of the mental health problems that are out there, mainly caused, not mainly, but I think in a great way caused by all the influences that we get and all the, the picture perfect lives that we see, but we don't see, what's happening behind the screens.
Yeah, we always make it into a painting on a wall, like it's something we can't get to, but living in the moment just eliminates that and makes your life, the life you're living, the painting that's supposed to be on the wall. You shared earlier that you went through a divorce. Thank you for sharing that. How did Stoicism and how did your philosophy help you through that? I'm assuming was probably a difficult process. And I say that because sometimes people are happy to get divorced, so I'm not making any assumptions. But how did Stoicism help you through that season of time?
Yeah, and that was a big pivotal part of my life. And one of the things, when you go through something like that, it's a shock. It's something that, well, maybe you can see it coming in a subconscious level, which I kind of did. And for me, it was a kind of a good moment as well. And as the separation luckily went in a good footing, so there was not a lot of harm. But I did go through like a, kind of a destructive period of life, and based on that as well, I kind of quit alcohol. I've been sober for many years now, which is a great experience, which I can recommend people, because I was a heavy drinker. I was a heavy social drinker. I never drank at home, but when I used to go out to drink, it was just, let's go, and there was no end in sight. And someone told me, oh, you should stop drinking, I would just pick it up a notch. And but and this is, people don't realize the destructive power that alcohol has on our lives. And I think that that's something that is, I realize now, and I'm, I'm willing to, I'm here to set my example to help people see that as well. Yeah. But helping me get through that divorce is, Stoicism gave me this foundational level of, okay, this is something you can fall back on. Mm-hmm. So what I did is I set myself a couple of rules. One, no alcohol, exercising, reading more, working on myself, seeing what it really means to me, sitting in it, all of those things. And that's where the Stoic philosophy really helped me to see, okay, what is the worst that could happen right now? Okay, I'm really here, I'm divorced. Okay, what is the things that you really struggle with? Okay, I'm struggling with telling it to people, right? Showing that kind of, that kind of shame on being divorced, the failure. Okay, so let's define failure, let's define success, let's define life. So asking those questions really helped me gather myself, really give this part of my life a place. And that showed me where, and even a platform to grow, to make sure that, okay, now it's my time to regain my life and to build my own future again and to build myself up. So, the virtues came in mind, but also things like amor fati, memento mori. Amor fati is okay, love your faith, love the moment. Even though it's hard, it's difficult, this is your moment. You can still get out of it and see that the light is there. If you just do the right thing right now, you're going to get better. There's memento mori. Remember, you'll die. How big of an impact is this really? If you look at it, the grand scheme of thing. Yeah. At the end of the day, there is, your time is limited. So you have two choices. You can either sit with it, or you can, work out of it. And one really important thing is kind of that victim mentality, that taking responsibility for your life. And I was always the person who's like, oh, why me? Look how poor, how sad I am. But I read this really interesting quote by, it's usually attributed to Freud, but it isn't really. But it's the quote goes, most people don't want freedom because freedom requires taking responsibility, and people are afraid of responsibility. And I asked myself, what is my responsibility for life right now? So I'm responsible to make the best out of it. My ex made a decision, and, my role there, I have to, look into that as well. But now is the moment to take my responsibility for the right action. So that changed me into, instead of being as a victim, saying, okay, why me? No, why not me? This has happened to so many people out there. Yeah. So many people are divorced. So many people are going through a lot of more difficult things than I do. Yeah. So I can get over this. And that's kind of really helped me to get over it. And then one quote that I always remember from Marcus Aurelius, he said, just stand up straight and not straightened. That always helps me physically, but it also helps me like in that, okay, now it's my time. This is my life. If I want to make the best of it, it's up to me.
So from listening to some of your podcasts and just from what you're sharing now, it seems like the Stoics really embrace the reality that life is difficult. And you've touched on that a little bit just in your last response. Can you expand on that a little bit more? Because I don't know if everybody embraces that ideology. I know that I do. But life is difficult. Life can be very difficult. Talk about that.
Yeah, and great quote about Seneca. In one of his essays, he writes, "Why weep of parts of life? Well, all of life is asking for our tears." I butchered the quote here a little bit. That's not my best forte to quote people, but they say life is difficult. But even in that sense, it also shows you that people go through these difficult things, and we can use those examples for ourselves to go through it as well. And the Stoics, they even take it a step further, right? They say they talk about the logos, the rational universe, where we got our reason and logic from God or the universe, nature, and they say there is no real good or bad, right? Good or bad are labels that we put on stuff. Again, then we talk about this preferred differences. I prefer to be healthy than to be sick. But if I'm sick, I can still be a good person. If I'm poor, I can still be a good person. If I'm rich, I can still be a good person. I think that might even be more difficult than when you have less. Because in my travels, I've met so many people who didn't have anything, and they were so willing and free to share and welcoming. While I've met people who have had everything, and they closed the door, before you even went there. So they say you can live well in every circumstance. That's up to you. That's your decision. And yeah, life is difficult. And that should also share us, give us a little bit more compassion to people around us. I think that that's something that's really missing. People are people are focused on themselves, but in the wrong way. They're focused just that I want to have my needs and desires met. And Epictetus, he was the mentor of Marcus Aurelius. They never met, but Marcus Aurelius was given his discourses, which were written by one of his students, and he's really big on this. He talks about the dichotomy of control, but he has some discourses out there in a handbook. If anyone wants to start reading Epictetus, you can look the handbook of Epictetus. It's short, it's just some kind of concise lessons. And he talks about, controlling your wants and desires and the things that you wish to avoid. That can already decrease the level of difficulty in your life that you have, because a lot of the difficulties that we have are made by ourselves. Like, oh, my life is miserable. Why? Because look at this person. He has so much more than I have. I want to have this house. I want to have that. But if we focus again, on the present, then we can see that we have everything we need to live a good life. And even those difficult moments, we have all the tools to get through them. And that's what the Stoics say. You have it all in you. And one great example is Stephen Hawking, right? Stephen Hawking was, throughout his adult life, was in a wheelchair. But he said, I've never been so free because I can let my mind go through all the ends of the galaxy, to visit the black holes, to go there. So the power of the mind, that's what it's all about, the mind and the soul. That is something that can really set us free, according to Stoics. But the physical life, the mortal life, that aspect, it is difficult, right? But we have it in ourselves to make it easier. By just focusing on what is required of us right now.
So I'm making sure I understood you correctly. So there's no absolutes in Stoicism, meaning there's no real good and no bad. It's just, did I understand that correctly? Or
so the Stoics, they believe in cause and effect, right? So there's a cause and there's an effect, and nature doesn't have this sense of doing something because it's bad. It's just like, this happened, so then this is going to happen, right? That rational part, that reason and logic. Now for us, we have that labels like, these things are bad. And, that's something that as a society, we can all kind of make these moral judgments. And then we kind of look at Freud. Freud is like, oh yeah, you say that this is moral now, but maybe later this is kind of, it's all kind of a man-made construct, right? But we can come together as like, okay, that's why the virtues are so important. That's why we need to have the wisdom to see what is truly happening. What is really happening? For example, if you were to insult me, then I can say, I can get really offended by it, labeling it as something horrible, or I can say, okay, Mike said something about me. Let's see what's the truth behind it. Oh, maybe I'm not as nice as I thought I was. Maybe I need to look at my behavior. Maybe there's some kind of truth in there, right? Or this is just his opinion. It doesn't really affect me. So those are the kind of labels, and it is, and that's where we have this human part. The Stoics talk about the sage, the wise person who knows everything, but we are just mere mortals, right? We do struggle with our the human side, our opinions, our views that are made quickly. But in the grand scheme of things, in the natural part, and if you really zoom out, no, those things that are happening right now are so micro, so small, that they think about cause and effect. So no, there aren't any really good and bad. It's just things that happen, and we look at them through our filter and give them that label, it is a really difficult concept to fathom, to think about. But that's kind of how the purest form of Stoicism would look like.
Okay, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around this myself. So there's clearly a moral code in Stoicism, right? So does that not nullify the absence of good and bad?
Yeah, and
am I making sense?
Yeah, and this is kind of like, so they are kind of compatibilist. So you have the deterministic state where it's kind of cause and effect, but then we come into play, like we are kind of this entity with a rational mind, but we are the dichotomy between the animalistic side and the rational side. And we have this free will, this sliver of free will to say, yeah, I can live with this, right? Or I accept my faith, right? So it is difficult to wrap our heads around it, because we do live a life, and that's where this virtues comes to mind again, where we have to find out the truth. What is the real truth, and what is the meaning behind life? We have to live just in a fair way to each other as a community, because that's really important as well. So in those kind of connections, we do have that sense of good and bad, right? We have I keep forgetting who it is. It's Heracles. Heracles. He was a Stoic philosopher, and he had these circles, right? The circle is like, I'm in the core, then you have your family, your friends, your society, the world, and it kind of expands. But in those closer circles, in those interactions, in that social structure, there are those good and bads. Like, how do I treat you? How do I treat myself? Am I doing the right thing? So that's where that moral code comes from, and that's where we can ask, are my actions just, and are they in line with reason and logic to what I'm supposed to be doing according to my nature and the nature in big. So it is a difficult concept to get around, but there are different. If we look at it from different levels, then we can apply that good and bad structure to it. But at the grand scheme of things, that's kind of the cause and effect. Things are going to happen, and
it's an interesting way of looking at it, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Thomas Aquinas, but on the subject of good and evil, Aquinas wrote that evil is not a thing in and of itself. It's actually the absence of a thing. So when all good is removed from something, then all is left is evil. Does that make sense? Evil is nothing. Evil is not in essence of itself. It's of the absence of something else, which is good.
And I think that kind of aligns with what the Stoics talk about virtue. Virtue is knowledge, right? Virtue is knowing what is right, and knowing the virtuous thing. Vice is ignorance, the absence of that knowledge, not knowing what the right thing is, not knowing what your nature is, not knowing what the virtues are. So that's where it's also they say, okay, be compassionate with someone who made a mistake. Why? Because they don't know what the right thing to do is. So that's kind of that's kind of aligned with the Thomas Aquinas sense of like the absence of something is then evil. And the Stoics say, that's wisdom, that's knowledge. The absence of that knowledge is that evil, because a person wouldn't harm themselves willingly. They would do that because they don't know what the right way to act is. And that's why we need that introspection.
That's a good parallel. I like that. Talk about Stoic indifference. Is that related to what we're discussing now?
Yeah, and the Stoic indifference is, again, it's related to what is the good and the bad thing, right? It's like, okay, then it comes again to that externals, It's like, I can't control this, so I shouldn't really worry about this. The only thing that I worry about is me right now in the present. The past, it's also indifferent to me because it's gone. There's no more control. I can take some lessons out of it, but I use them in the present. The future, it's also unknown. I can't control that either. So again, the indifference about all the externals, that's what we just kind of try to keep that aside as much as possible, right? And we just focus on what we can control and on our own actions. That's kind of like, again, it's pretty much what you said, it's like that separation of the externals.
Yeah, okay. Is the aim of Stoicism to discover personal strengths that already exist within, or is it to cultivate new personal gifts and strengths?
So the purest aim, for me at least, is that eudaimonic state. Eudaimonia is that word of like, kind of like translated as happiness, but I prefer joy or peace of mind, that calmness. And, the skills and the things that we have, or the gifts that we have been given, because everybody is different, those are the tools to kind of perform our duty. So following your nature, that's the way how we can really perform our duties. And then if we have those gifts and those skills, we can cultivate them, we can make them grow. But in a sense, that really comes down to, again, knowing who we are and using the tools that we have and becoming the best version of who we are. And then anything that we do becomes valuable. Right, and that's another thing that I think is like what people are struggling with, and you mentioned a little bit in that Gen Z episode as well, where we put so much pressure on the kids to go to university or to go to college to pursue this academic career. But trades like carpentry or electricians or all that stuff, or teachers, they're kind of being pushed aside. Like I know from like my surroundings, even in the Netherlands, where people would tell parents, like, oh, your son or daughter didn't make it to college, they'll be fine, but they have a far better chance to be financially independent at like 30 or 40, while someone who's studying to become a doctor, is going to be paying off debt, and I don't know. So we should promote those skills and those gifts that people have, instead of shoehorning them into a certain direction of life, but really cultivating those skills as it is connected with who they are. Like I was a student when I was I've worked as a teacher for years, so I could understand the students who couldn't really sit still, because I was one of them.
Yeah.
I was always busy and never really But for me, that's not something bad. That's just something who someone is, and by closing that off, you really close off someone being able to explore and develop themselves for who they are. Yeah. And especially as a child, that's something that is really important. And I feel like as an adult, we just being, our curiosity and our playfulness is just being shut down. It's like, no, you've got to act like this. Well, people who are curious and who are playful with life, that's also what you asked about, like that adversity. That's one way to deal with it. Oh, this is happening with me. Let's see the best way to deal with it. Let's just take it a little bit more cheerful. And sometimes it feels like we're making the world more depressed than it should be.
Yeah, definitely. So you said you grew up Christian, right? Talk about some of the different parallels, if any, that you've noticed with Stoicism and Christianity that you can recall.
For me, it was more of the specific guides, and I just didn't feel like. And one of the crazy things, I went to the Vatican in 2000 somewhere. Actually saw John Paul II, Pope John Paul II, from quite a short distance when he was doing like the Orbi et Orbi, the Easter thing. I think it was at Easter. Mm-hmm. But for me, when I went to the Vatican and I saw, it was like a marketplace, everything being sold there, the water and all these things, and that just didn't fit well for me. Yeah. But what it did, and my parents still go to church, and sometimes I go with them, and the message, that is helpful, right? And I don't see that people, I don't say bad things about religion, right? For me, it's like people need to follow the things that help them live better. And I'm even not here to turn people into stoics. What I would like to have is people to think more about their lives and what is important to them and how they want to live it. But the connections between Stoicism and Christianity are there, right? It's all about being a better person. And I remember going to the classes, back in the day with the priest, and they would tell us, this is how you will live. And one remark that always stayed with me is like, you can go to church every Sunday and not be a good Christian, or you can never go to church and be the best one out there. It's all about how you present yourself as a person, and it's all about how you live these things. And that's why I'm not very good at quotes, but there's so many people out there who just throw like, oh, this is a quote here, this is a quote there, but then you see them living lives. And even in Stoic, the Stoic fields, and there's so many Facebook groups out there, and they get vicious. Like one of the reasons why I started my blog.
Vicious Stoic? I didn't think that was a thing.
No, because they are so on the soapbox, and like one of the reasons I started blogging because I don't deal well with criticism, so I figured I gotta expose myself to it to better deal with
Yeah.
it. So I just went blogging and I was like put it on these Facebook groups, and I did so, and I was shocked, to see like Stoic instead of like encouraging you, but they were like, oh, you said this wrong word and you used this wrong and blah blah
Really?
blah. And they were like, oh yeah, like threads, like long threads, and they were just like, and at
Wow.
the beginning I was like, oh, am I not doing this right? It kept me up at night, and now it's just like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
So it isn't knowing all the stuff, but it's how you use it to become a better person, and
Mhm.
that is, I think, the parallel in most philosophies and most religions. If you use it properly, and my ex was from Morocco, so I've lived with Muslim people. I've met them, and I had a celebration there as well for my marriage, and the basic core thing of people, what I've seen during my travels, is they just want to have a peaceful life. They just want to have a nice, calm, good life for themselves and the people around them. And if you use any religion in the right way, then that will help you become a better person. So there are those links, and there are differences. Like some of the texts that I struggle with the concept of God from a Christian perspective. That's something that I struggle with. That's where Stoicism helps me more, because it looks at nature more pantheistic, right?
Mhm.
It's all of it is the world, is nature, is God. So that connects more with me than the Christian view of it.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that. The whole point of how somebody lives, in the New Testament, it does say that you will know them by their fruits. And these are people who live virtuously. And it's not what comes out of our lips, it's what's displayed in our lives and how we live. We can say whatever we want. We can say, yeah, I go to church, I'm a great Christian, and just be a dreadful person. So it's really the virtue is in the way you live your life, and the people closest to you will be able to be witnesses to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the Stoics would obviously the Christian time would, and the Stoics, they kind of overlapped a little bit, but the Stoics would see Jesus as a sage, right? Like Socrates, right? This is the example that we want to live up to. But they would also be honest enough to say, like, I'm not there, right? I'm definitely not there myself, but I'm trying, right? This is the state that I would like to go and be better at.
Yeah.
So if people ask you, like, okay, you want to improve yourself, but what is your direction? What is your kind of focus point on where you want to go to? That would be it, right? To live well, to
Yeah.
be that better person, and to have those examples. So, yeah, this is kind of, when people ask me, it's like, okay, so what is the real value of Stoicism? Where does it really hit the ground, and how can I use it in life? And for example, with my coaching, I use it in my coaching. I use it mainly as a backdrop for me to be non-judgmental, to ask their questions, to focus on them. But they asked me, okay, how can I use it? It's like, yeah, there's so many practical applications that we can use it in our daily life. For example, one of the things for me, as I was working again in Dubai, I was dealing with some colleagues, and one of them was just frustrating me. It was just like everything, he was just playing these games and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I read this quote by Marcus Aurelius. He said, that person is bound to be that way. It's like getting angry at a fig tree for secreting juice. And by the way, soon you'll both be dead and soon forgotten, right? Something like that. So I went back to work that next day, and I kind of looked at his behavior from a completely different standpoint, more of like an observer. And I started looking, and I was like, this is him, right? I cannot change this person. And if I get annoyed by it, it's like me getting angry at having sticky fingers for touching that fig tree. It's like, I know that there's juice there and it's sticky. So I looked at myself as like, how can I now change myself, my own behavior? How can I respond differently? So when people ask me, like, so it's really great, all these things in the books. And I was like, yeah, but these are applications that we can, apply. And it's for you to find the ones that work for you.
Yeah.
This quote really worked for me, but maybe you're dealing with something else. Maybe you're dealing with anger, or maybe you're dealing with other parts in your life. So read those books, read the Stoics or the Bible or all those kind of books that are out, or the wisdom that is out there, and use what works for you, because it's all a very individualistic journey that we're going through.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely sounds like the way you've embraced Stoicism, Benny, has really helped you overcome obstacles in your life. And so I just applaud you for finding that vehicle to help you overcome what we have both agreed is the difficult journey of life. So talk about, you do Stoic coaching. as a service. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and that's something that I kind of rolled into. As I said, I left my job as a teacher and I started writing my blog, and I started talking on X, on Twitter weekly, and people, we talk about Stoicism and just bettering our lives with my two partners with the company Via Stoica, Brendan and Bryce, great people. And people say like, oh, social media is bad, but if you use it the right way, you can make great connections and great friends there.
Yeah.
So I used it that way, but I got a lot of questions in the background on my DMs. It's like, hey, I'm struggling with this. How do you look at this? And just started, having one-on-one meetings, just to help out. And that's where I kind of got this idea of like, I can do this better. I can help more people. And that's, as you said, right? You have this kind of gift or duty in life to help other people. And I was helping myself, and I saw this in another interview that you had as well with someone who's dealing with anxiety. I can't remember the exact episode, and depression, and he was talking about the same. So I tried to find this thing, but back in the day it wasn't there online.
Yeah.
So I now want to make it more accessible to people, and to at least eliminate that step of having to look for it. So when I do the coaching, again, I use it in a kind of a two-way street. People do find us. And I just wrote like, okay, Stoic coaching, and suddenly we appeared like ranked number 1 on Google. So apparently there's not a lot of people out there, which is great, right, for me to reach more people. But I use it for one side for me as a coach to really look at, okay, be objective, be the observer, listen, because I think that's what a coach really is supposed to do, to just listen and reflect the questions or the things back to the people they coach, but also to give them kind of like, some kind of tools or some kind of extra support when they go through difficult stuff. Yeah. Oh, this is kind of people from back 2,000 years ago, they struggled with this.
Yeah.
Right, and here's a quote, or here's some kind of value system, or here's like, how do you think about this? So there, and again, the coaching isn't meant to turn people into Stoics, but it is meant to use that ancient philosophy. And Stoicism is the foundation of cognitive behavioral therapy, of CBT. So when you look at CBT, that's pretty much Stoicism. And we have, even on a podcast, and he was on some of our spaces, Donald Robertson, who was a previous CBT practitioner. He wrote a lot of really interesting books on Stoicism. So if anyone wants to read, like How to Think Like a Roman Emperor is a great book to read if you read Meditations. But he wrote papers on the foundational power of Stoicism into the modern day therapies. And that's where this kind of connection goes to. So we can use that knowledge to help people get a better idea of what their thoughts, their beliefs are, how they look at life. And those kind of foundational questions are powerful in the coaching.
So tell me about the Street Stoics. That's your podcast. Talk about it.
Yeah, that's such a great development how that happened. Again, me and Bryce started that out from we've been doing these spaces for over 2 years now.
So it's the Spaces recordings that you roll into the podcast?
It's kind of built from the Spaces. Okay. So we started doing those spaces. We met there. Someone else was doing them at the beginning, and then I took over the Wednesday space, which is now on a Tuesday. So the Tuesday space, and then on Saturday, me and Bryce go through the books. Like we're working through Seneca at the moment. And we used to, like, after those spaces, which sometimes take 2 to 3 hours, we used to call each other and kind of talk about it even more, this and that, how do you do this? And at one point we was like, we need to give this to a wider audience, right? We need to expand this, and we should record these conversations. So that's pretty much what we started doing. We just figured like, we have these spaces, conversations where we get a lot of great input from people outside, with different backgrounds, philosophy, but religion, and just how people view things. And that will just trigger our minds. It's like, okay, let's examine this a little bit more. And that's where we kind of where we added Street Stoics to it. So we figured we want to work this conversation and bring it to a wider audience outside of X, because X is kind of a bubble, and I think all kind of social medias are their own bubble. And with this platform, we can reach a wider audience, and it's been going well. And we've had Donald Robertson, the author, on there. We've had some other great interviews as well. We just recently, one of my favorites was Mark Titer, the Dutch speed skater who won the Olympic gold medal, using Stoic philosophy to help him get through things as well. So for me personally, it's such a great journey to go through and to see like, I get to be on podcasts like yours, which is great. I just kind of exploring this. But the main purpose of it is just to to show people like there are ways and tools to help you get through difficult parts of life. If you're struggling with something, don't just sit there in it, but find the power in yourself to say, I want to get through this, and I can, and I'm using myself as an example, but many people out there in the spaces, they come and share their stories. It's quite impactful how vulnerable they are, and how they, after the spaces, they say, oh wow, you really helped me get through something. And that is so energizing. It's like, I need to do this more, and I need to do this better. So that's kind of why I joined forces with Brendan and Bryce to make this a little bit more professional. I'm kind of an entrepreneur at heart, but I lack certain qualities. So that's why it's good to kind of form things together. And it's always better to work with other people. So that's kind of how it moved together from the spaces to Street Stoics, and now Via Stoica, with the pure essence of just trying to help people out there and show people, life is difficult, but there are ways that you can overcome it. But you have to do it. You have to put the work in, and you have to put the action in, but find support, right? And you mentioned that somewhere else as well. It's like, we have to step over that kind of shameful hurdle, especially as men. I don't know if that's, but men are far less prone to look for help, to look for support. And I've had that, one of my coaching clients say that as well. It's like, I'm so helpful, I'm so grateful that I got over that step and asked, like, hey, can you help me? And can you coach me? And can you get through that? Because it is a difficult thing for men to do.
Yeah, it is, definitely. No, that's an important point you make. And we have an upcoming podcast that we've already recorded with Avram Weiss, who's with Psychology Today magazine, and we have a whole episode on men and why they are the way they are, and I'll send you the link when it's up. It touches on a lot of the things you just mentioned. But Benny, how can people find you?
Yeah, so there are different ways. You can go to viastoica.com, where you can find pretty much all the information as well, or streetstoics.com is the website of the podcast, and you can find us on all the platforms there as well, or on X or on Instagram. The main thing is just, or Benny at viastoica.com. If you want to send me an email, you can reach out there. But those are the main things you can find me. And for example, on Instagram, I don't do journaling very well. People, they kind of rebuttal me on that, because I do write every morning and then every evening, kind of something that morphed into poetry, and I use AI to make like a little image. So if you want to have like a little inspirational thing there, you can find me doing that every morning and then every evening. So yeah, that's where people can find me.
I'll make sure to include that in the show notes. And thanks for the discussion today. I really appreciate you making the time and teaching us about this ancient philosophy.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. Hopefully someone enjoyed it. If I have some, get some support out of it, and can improve their life a little bit more. So yeah, thanks for having me on.
Definitely.
Again. My pleasure.
And that'll do it for this edition. We're out of here, guys. You know where to find us, mikecpodcast.com, and on all podcast platforms. And until next time, see ya.
The Mike C Podcast.